So here's the thing about the Galactic Combat Championships that nobody tells you up front. It's less of a tournament and more of a really expensive performance art piece where everyone takes themselves way too seriously. I'm Captain Jake Reeves, by the way, and yes, before you ask, I'm about as qualified to represent humanity in an intergalactic blade fighting competition as a goldfish is qualified to teach swimming lessons. But apparently, that didn't matter to Earth's diplomatic corps when they volunteered me for this circus. Let me back up. 3 months ago, humanity gets this fancy holographic invitation from the Galactic Council. Real pompous stuff. Gold trimming on a hologram, which I didn't even know was possible. The message essentially said, "Congratulations, primitive species. You've been cordially invited to participate in the 127th Galactic Combat Championships. Please send your finest warrior. Try not to embarrass yourselves too badly." I'm paraphrasing, but that was the vibe. Now, the Galactic Combat Championships have been running for something like 3,000 years. It's this massive deal where every species sends their absolute best blade fighter. We're talking warriors who've trained since they could walk. Literal decades of meditation, practice, and achieving oneness with their energy blades. These aren't just fighters. They're artists, philosophers, and religious zealots all wrapped into one package. The reigning champion? A 4-armed insectoid nightmare named Thrakzul, the Unbreakable. 15 consecutive years this guy has won. He's got fans, merchandising, his own line of energy blade accessories, the works. So naturally, Earth's response to this invitation was to check who had basic fencing experience and wasn't currently deployed somewhere important. That's how they landed on me. 3 fencing classes in college. Got a B-. Honestly spent most of those classes trying to impress a girl named Michelle who, for the record, was not impressed. But hey, I can hold a sword without stabbing myself, and apparently that made me the most qualified candidate who was also willing to go. Everyone else took one look at Thrakzul's highlight reel, and suddenly remembered they had prior commitments, dental appointments, jury duty, explosive diarrhea, the usual excuses. The Galactic Council sent a follow-up message asking for our champion's credentials. Earth's diplomatic team sent back my military record and conveniently left out the part where my only blade experience involved a foam sword at a Renaissance fair. They accepted. I think they just wanted to see what would happen when a human got absolutely demolished in front of the entire galaxy. Entertainment value and all that. The Council's message even included a helpful note about how humans should observe and learn from superior civilizations. Real classy bunch, these guys. So there I was, 2 weeks before the tournament, standing in a cargo bay with a genuine steel longsword I'd ordered off the military surplus catalog. Nothing fancy. No energy blade, no plasma edge, no quantum-phased nonsense. Just good old-fashioned folded steel with a nice sharp edge. My commanding officer asked me if I had a training plan. I told him I was thinking about watching some YouTube videos on basic sword techniques and maybe doing some cardio. He stared at me for a solid 30 seconds before walking away without another word. The thing is, I actually did some research on these Galactic Combat Championships. Watched about 100 hours of footage. And you know what I noticed? Every single fight followed the same pattern. Elaborate opening ceremonies, lots of posturing, then these incredibly complex sequences of attacks and parries that looked absolutely beautiful and took forever to actually accomplish anything. It was like watching professional dancers have a very slow, very choreographed argument. Don't get me wrong, the skill was impressive. These aliens could do things with energy blades that defied physics. Spinning strikes, impossible angles, movements so fast they blurred. But here's what kept bugging me. In all those hours of footage, not once did anyone just, kick their opponent, or tackle them, or do anything that wasn't specifically blade-related. It was like they'd collectively agreed that only certain moves counted, and everything else was just off the table. Which got me thinking about humanity's approach to combat throughout history. We've never been much for rules when the fighting starts. If it works, we do it. If it doesn't work, we try something else until something does work. We've spent thousands of years fighting with swords when losing actually meant dying. Not losing points, not getting eliminated from a tournament. Actually, genuinely not going home to see your family ever again. That kind of pressure makes you real practical, real fast. So, yeah, while Thrakzul was probably meditating on the 17 forms of energy blade, harmony, or whatever, I sharpened my completely mundane steel sword, did some stretches, and downloaded a podcast about the history of street fighting. The transport to the tournament station left in 3 days. I packed light, sword, regular clothes, and an uncomfortable amount of optimism considering I was about to get my ass handed to me on galactic television. My last night on Earth, my friends threw me a going-away party. Someone made a cake with "Good luck not dying" written in frosting. Real supportive group, my friends. But standing there, eating cake and listening to everyone's jokes about how quickly I was going to lose, something occurred to me. These aliens? They'd spent their entire lives preparing for this tournament. Training, studying, perfecting their craft. Me? I was just a guy with a sword who really didn't want to look like an idiot in front of the entire galaxy. And sometimes, not wanting to look stupid is the best motivation you can ask. 4. The tournament station turned out to be this massive floating palace that probably cost more than Earth's entire GDP. Everything was crystalline and glowing, with these impossible architectural angles that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. Very fancy. Very intimidating. Very. We have technology you primitives couldn't possibly understand. I got escorted to my quarters by a floating robot that seemed personally offended by my existence. It kept making these little beeping sounds that I'm pretty sure translated to, "Ugh, the human is here." The accommodations were actually nice, though. Big room, great view of space, and a bed that automatically adjusted to my physiology, which was good because I was planning to sleep a lot before inevitably getting destroyed. But first, there was a mandatory meet and greet with the other competitors. Joy. The reception hall was this enormous dome filled with warriors from across the galaxy, and let me tell you, I have never felt more aggressively average in my entire life. These beings were spectacular. We're talking species I didn't even know existed, each one looking like they could bench press a small moon. First person I met was Throxul, the Unbreakable himself. 4 arms. Chitinous exoskeleton. Compound eyes that seem to look through you and judge your soul. He stood about 7 feet tall and radiated this aura of absolute confidence that comes from never losing anything ever. "Ah," he said, his translator rendering his clicks and chittering into a deep, resonant voice. "The human representative. How quaint." "Quaint." He called me quaint. "That's me," I said, sticking out my hand for a handshake. "Jake Reeves, nice to meet you." He stared at my hand like I just offered him a dead fish. "I do not participate in primitive greeting rituals before combat," he said. "It disturbs my meditative preparation." "Right, yeah, wouldn't want to disturb that," I said, putting my hand back down. "How long do you meditate anyway?" 6 hours daily, sometimes more before significant matches. 6 hours. Got it. I usually just stretch for like 10 minutes and call it good. The look he gave me suggested he wasn't sure if I was joking or just incredibly stupid. Probably both. Next up was Velshara, this crystalline being who looked like someone had carved a warrior out of living diamond. Light refracted through her at weird angles, creating little rainbows on the floor. Very pretty, very unsettling. "Human," she acknowledged with a slight nod. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. "I have been training in the blade arts for 847 of your Earth years. How long have you studied?" I did some quick math in my head. If we're counting college fencing classes, about 3 months. But there were only 3 classes, and one of them got cancelled, so really more like 6 weeks. She blinked. At least, I think she blinked. Her whole face kind of shimmered. "You jest, surely." "I really don't." She floated away without another word. I got the impression I'd just confirmed every negative stereotype about humans in a single conversation. Then there was Krathmore, a warrior monk from a high-gravity world who looked like someone had compressed a rhinoceros into humanoid form. Thick armor plating, muscles on his muscles, and this perpetual scowl that suggested he'd never smiled once in his entire life. "The human," he growled. "I watched footage of your species' combat training. Pathetic. Weak. You move as though gravity is a suggestion rather than a constant. Well, our gravity is lighter than yours, so technically it kind of is a suggestion in comparison. This is why you will lose," he said, turning away. "No discipline. No respect for the craft." I was starting to sense a theme here. The tournament organizers gave us a tour of the training facilities, and oh boy, were they impressive. Holographic opponents, gravity manipulation fields, energy blade calibration chambers, rooms specifically designed to help you achieve blade consciousness, which apparently was a real thing these aliens took seriously. I watched Throxul go through his practice routine. It was genuinely beautiful. 4 energy blades, 1 in each hand, moving in perfect synchronization. Patterns within patterns. Strikes that flowed into blocks that flowed into counters. He made it look like a dance, a very deadly, very precise dance. Velshara practiced next. Her technique was different, more fluid, like water taking the shape of whatever container held it. She spent 20 minutes doing the same strike over and over, adjusting it by microscopic degrees each time. Perfection through endless repetition. Crathmore's practice was all power. Massive overhead strikes that could probably cut through a tank. He moved like an avalanche with a sword. Slow by some standards, but with so much force behind each movement that speed didn't matter. Then it was my turn to use the facilities. Everyone stopped to watch. I pulled out my steel sword, did a few practice swings to get a feel for the weight, and ran through some basic forms I half remembered from those fencing classes. Advance, retreat, parry, riposte. Nothing fancy, nothing particularly impressive. After about 10 minutes, I called it good and headed back to my quarters. The silence behind me was deafening. Back in my room, I sharpened my sword with a whetstone I'd brought from Earth, just sitting there, scraping metal on stone, while outside my window I could see Thraxul's training chamber where he was still going through increasingly complex routines. My computer dinged. An email from Earth. My commanding officer asking if I needed anything. Additional training resources, maybe. Motivational materials. I wrote back, "I'm good. Found some cat videos. Morale is high." He responded with, "I'm not sure if you're the bravest person I know or the dumbest." "Why not both?" I replied. That night, I lay in my automatically adjusting bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about tomorrow's preliminary exhibitions. Not actual tournament matches yet, just demonstrations where each warrior showed off their skills for the judges and audience. Somewhere in this station, Thraxul was probably meditating on the 17 forms of blade harmony. Velshara was likely achieving oneness with her energy weapon. Crathmore was probably doing push-ups in triple gravity while mentally preparing for victory. And me? I was watching videos of cats falling off furniture and trying to remember if I'd packed enough deodorant for the week. Different approaches to combat preparation, I guess. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept nagging at me. All these warriors with their decades of training, their elaborate techniques, their spiritual journeys through combat mastery. Not one of them looked like they'd ever been in an actual fight where the rules went out the window and survival was the only thing that mattered. That had to count for something, right? The mandatory ceremonial dinner was exactly as painful as I'd anticipated, maybe worse. They'd set up this enormous banquet hall with a table that seemed to stretch into infinity. Each competitor had their own designated spot with their species-appropriate seating arrangements and dietary requirements. I got a regular chair and what looked like normal food, which was honestly a relief because some of the stuff being served to other species looked like it was still moving. The whole event was supposed to be about honor and mutual respect between warriors. A chance to break bread before we tried to metaphorically break each other. In practice, it was mostly an opportunity for everyone to peacock about their training philosophy. Thraxul went first, naturally. Reigning champion gets to set the tone. He stood up, all four arms spread in what I assumed was a gesture of significance, and launched into this speech about the spiritual, the journey of combat, how the blade wasn't just a weapon but an extension of one's very soul, how he'd spent 15 years not just mastering technique but achieving perfect harmony between mind, body, and energy. "The blade and I are one," he said, his translator giving his words this dramatic echo effect. 10,000 hours of meditation, 20,000 hours of practice, every movement calculated, every strike deliberate. This is the path to true mastery. Everyone nodded appreciatively. Someone from across the table actually started a slow clap. Velshara went next. She floated slightly above her seat, which seemed like showing off, but whatever. "I have devoted 847 years to understanding the blade," she said, light refracting through her in hypnotic patterns. "In that time, I have learned that combat is not about violence. It is about conversation. A dialogue between warriors, spoken in the language of steel and energy. Each strike is a word. Each parry is a response. To fight is to communicate at the deepest possible level." I noticed several competitors wiping away what might have been tears. This was getting really philosophical really fast. Crathmore stood, cracking his neck with a sound like breaking concrete. "Combat is about strength," he growled. "The weak philosophize, the strong act. I have trained in gravity 3 times that of your Earth, human. Every movement I make carries the weight of absolute conviction. There is no room for doubt, no space for hesitation, only power and the will to use it." More nodding, more appreciation for the Shen philosophical insights. Then came a warrior I hadn't met yet, a floating jellyfish-looking alien named Prislax, who spent a good 10 minutes explaining how their species viewed combat as a form of interpretive dance and how violence was really just aggressive poetry. At this point, I was seriously considering faking a medical emergency. But then, the tournament director, this bird-like alien with way too many feathers, gestured toward me. And now, we shall hear from the human representative. Captain Reeves, please share your combat philosophy with your fellow warriors. Every eye in the room turned toward me, and I mean every eye. Some of these species had a lot of eyes. I stood up, immediately felt underdressed because I wasn't glowing or floating or crackling with energy, and tried to figure out what to say. So, humanity's approach to combat is pretty straightforward. I started. We find what works, and then we do that thing until it stops working. Then we find something else that works and do that instead. Silence. Could you elaborate? The director asked, feathers ruffling in what might have been confusion. Sure. Okay. So throughout human history, we fought a lot. Like, a lot. And the thing about actual fighting when your life depends on it is that you don't really care about harmony or spiritual journeys or interpretive dance. You care about going home alive. I could feel the mood in the room shifting, not in a good way. We've used swords, spears, axes, rocks, sticks, our bare hands, whatever was available. And the lesson we learned over thousands of years of killing each other is pretty simple. Fancy doesn't matter. Efficiency matters. Looking good is nice, but winning is better. Thraxul's mandibles clicked in what I was pretty sure was disapproval. Are you suggesting, Velshara said slowly, that technique is irrelevant? No, technique is great. Technique is super useful. But technique is a tool, not a religion. If your technique isn't working, you change it, you adapt, you do whatever it takes to win. This is barbaric, Crathmore rumbled. Combat without philosophy is mere violence. I mean, yeah, kinda, I admitted. But also, and hear me out here, sometimes violence is the point of combat. Like, that's literally what we're doing. Fighting. With weapons. To win a tournament. The tournament director looked like he'd just bitten into something sour. Captain Reeves, the Galactic Combat Championships are about more than simply winning. They are about demonstrating the pinnacle of martial achievement. The refinement of millennia of culture and tradition. Surely you understand this. I do understand it, I said. I'm just not sure I agree with it. You've all spent so much time making fighting beautiful that I think maybe you forgot what fighting is actually for. Thraxul stood up, all four hands slamming on the table. You dare insult the traditions of the championships. Human, you have no concept of what true mastery requires. Your species has barely left your own solar system, and you presume to lecture those of us who have perfected our crafts over centuries? Not lecturing, I said, staying calm. Just pointing out that there's a difference between perfecting a craft and preparing for combat. You've perfected a very specific sport, with very specific rules. That's cool. But actual fighting? That's messy and unpredictable and doesn't care about your technique. Perhaps, Velshara said coldly. This is why humanity was not invited to the championships until now. Your primitive understanding of combat arts suggests you are not ready for civilized competition. Ouch! That one stung a bit. Maybe you're right, I said, sitting back down. Guess we'll find out tomorrow. The rest of the dinner was incredibly awkward. Nobody wanted to sit near me. Conversations happened in hushed tones with occasional glances in my direction. I became the weird kid at the lunch table who said something controversial, and now everyone thinks you're either crazy or stupid. Dessert was served. Some kind of glowing pastry that was probably a delicacy. I ate 3 of them because they were delicious and also because I was stress eating. After dinner, as everyone filed out, Thraxul stopped next to my seat. Human, he said quietly. Your ignorance is almost endearing. Almost. I look forward to demonstrating the difference between your brutish efficiency and true mastery. It will be educational for you. Looking forward to it, I replied. He walked away, and I heard him tell another competitor that watching me fight would be like watching a child play with fire. Amusing at first, then concerning, then just sad. Back in my quarters, I pulled out my completely ordinary steel sword and gave it a few practice swings. No meditation, no spiritual journey, no harmony with the universe. Just a guy with a blade, preparing to probably embarrass his entire species on galactic television. I set an alarm for the morning, climbed into bed, and pulled up another cat video on my tablet. Sometimes the best combat philosophy is knowing when to just relax and not overthink things. Plus, the cats were hilarious. Tournament day arrived with all the pomp and ceremony of a royal wedding crossed with the Super Bowl and multiplied by about 1,000. The arena was absolutely massive. Think Roman Colosseum but floating in space with force fields instead of walls and approximately 70,000 aliens in the stands. Screens everywhere, showing different angles, real-time statistics, and what I'm pretty sure was live betting on the matches. I'd been relegated to the competitors' box, which was this fancy seating area where all the warriors sat between matches. Everyone had their own meditation pods or prayer spaces or whatever spiritual preparation zone they needed. I had a regular chair and a bag of what the station's food court assured me was approximately popcorn. It tasted like slightly burnt foam, but I was committed to the bit at this point. The opening ceremony took an hour, an actual hour. Speeches from the Galactic Council about honor and tradition. A holographic display showing highlights from the past 126 tournaments. An interpretive dance performance about the evolution of blade combat that I'm pretty sure was designed to test my patience. Finally, they got to the actual fighting. First match, Velshara versus some warrior from a species I couldn't pronounce. The opponent looked like a mantis shrimp had a baby with a samurai. Very intimidating. Lots of natural armor plating. The referee, a floating orb with too many eyes, announced the rules. Combat until one fighter was disarmed, incapacitated, or yielded. Energy blades only. No lethal strikes to be attempted. Standard tournament stuff. Both fighters ignited their energy blades. Velshara's was this brilliant crystal blue color that matched her body. Her opponent's was deep crimson. The match began, and oh boy, was it a show. Velshara moved like liquid light, flowing from one position to another. Her opponent countered with sharp, precise strikes. They circled each other, blades humming, each movement clearly the result of decades of training. The commentators were losing their minds. And there's the 17-pointed star of infinite reflection, one of them announced, their translator crackling with excitement. We haven't seen this technique in competition for over 40 years. I watched as Velshara executed what looked like an impossibly complex series of strikes and parries, her blade moving in geometric patterns that probably meant something significant to people who cared about this stuff. Her opponent attempted a counter with something called the Crimson Wave Ascending. This went on for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Don't get me wrong, it was impressive, beautiful, even, but also kind of boring, like watching two people play the slowest, most elaborate game of chess ever invented. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Velshara executed something the commentators called the final refraction, which involved a spinning strike that somehow disarmed her opponent through what looked like pure physics-defying wizardry. The crowd went absolutely insane, standing ovation, chanting her name, the works. Match time, 23 minutes, 47 seconds. Velshara bowed to all four directions, meditated for a moment in the center of the arena, then gracefully floated back to the competitor's box without so much as breathing hard. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the smugness radiating off her crystalline form. Next match. Krathmore versus a warrior from an aquatic species who'd brought their own water sphere to fight in. This seemed like a significant disadvantage for Krathmore, but apparently the tournament organizers loved making things complicated. The aquatic warrior moved through their water sphere with incredible speed, their energy blade leaving trails of bubbles. Krathmore stayed grounded, patient, waiting for his moment. The commentators discussed the philosophical implications of a land-based power fighter facing an aquatic speed fighter. They used words like dialectic and paradigmatic confrontation. I ate more approximately popcorn. The match was another display of technical mastery. The aquatic warrior's fluid movements against Krathmore's immovable defense. Poetry in motion, according to the commentators. A perfect example of contrasting styles creating combat harmony. Krathmore eventually won by shattering the water sphere with a single devastating overhead strike, then disarming his opponent in the resulting confusion. Match time, 31 minutes, 12 seconds. The crowd loved it. Analysis immediately began about his perfect patience and gravitational superiority. Krathmore returned to the competitor's box, muscles still not showing any signs of fatigue. He sat in his meditation pod and immediately entered what looked like a trance state. 3 more matches followed, each one a masterclass in elaborate technique. A warrior who fought with 6 blades simultaneously. Match time, 27 minutes. A gaseous being who could phase through attacks. Match time, 35 minutes. Someone who fought, blindfolded as a demonstration of their sensory mastery. Match time, 41 minutes. Every single match was treated like high art. The commentators analyzed every movement, every decision, every micro-adjustment. Experts were brought in to discuss the historical context of techniques. Fans in the stands held up holographic signs supporting their favorite warriors. I checked my watch multiple times. This was going to be a long day. Between matches, They showed commercials for energy blade maintenance products, meditation supplements, and a cologne called Warrior's Essence that promised to enhance your combat focus through aromatherapy. The galaxy had really monetized this whole thing. Finally, after what felt like years but was probably only 4 hours, the referee announced the final preliminary exhibition of the day. And now, the announcer's voice boomed through the arena, the moment many have been waiting for, the debut of humanity's representative in the Galactic Combat Championships. Reigning champion Throxzul the Unbreakable versus Captain Jake Reeves of Earth. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some polite applause, a lot of curious murmuring. I definitely heard some laughter. On the screens around the arena, they showed my stats. 3 fencing classes. No formal combat training. Primary weapon, basic steel sword. Combat philosophy, find what works. Next to Throxzul's impressive record of achievements, I looked like someone's kid brother who wandered into the wrong tournament. Throxzul stood, all 4 arms stretching in a display of flexibility that seemed designed to intimidate. His energy blades activated one by one, each a different shade of green, humming in perfect harmony. He'd been training for this moment his entire life. I stood up, grabbed my regular steel sword, and headed toward the arena entrance. No meditation, no ritual preparation, no spiritual journey. Just me, my sword, and a growing certainty that I was about to do something either really smart or really, really stupid. The crowd's noise swelled as I entered the arena. Time to find out which one it was. Walking into that arena felt like stepping onto the world's biggest stage wearing pajamas while everyone else wore tuxedos. The floor was this perfectly smooth material that probably cost more than a small country. Force fields shimmered at the edges, keeping the audience safe from any stray energy blasts. Floating cameras zipped around, capturing every angle for the billions watching across the galaxy. And there I was, holding a piece of sharpened metal that humanity had been using since we figured out how to heat up rocks. Throxzul entered from the opposite side, and the crowd absolutely erupted. He moved with this fluid confidence that comes from never doubting yourself for a single second. Each of his 4 arms held an energy blade, the green light casting weird shadows across his chitinous exoskeleton. He stopped at his designated starting position and immediately began his pre-combat ritual. And oh boy, was it a ritual. First, he arranged his 4 blades in a specific pattern while standing on one leg. Then he hummed something that his translator didn't bother converting, probably some ancient prayer to the blade gods or whatever. Then he executed this elaborate series of movements that looked like Tai Chi choreographed by someone on a caffeine high. The crowd watched in reverent silence. The commentators whispered about the significance of each gesture, the historical weight of the ritual, how Throxzul was demonstrating respect for the ancient traditions. This went on for 5 minutes. 5 entire minutes. I just stood there, sword resting on my shoulder, trying not to look as bored as I felt. Finally, the referee floated to the center of the arena. All eyes, and there were a lot of eyes, focused on the gleaming orb. "Competitors ready?" it asked. Throxzul settled into a perfect fighting stance, all 4 blades positioned at precise angles. "I am prepared," he announced formally. The referee turned to me. "Captain Reeves?" "Yep, good to go," I said. I could feel the disappointment from the crowd. No ritual, no ceremony, no respect for the traditions, just a guy ready to get this over with. "The rules," the referee began, its voice echoing through the arena. "Combat continues until one fighter is disarmed, incapacitated, or yields. Lethal strikes are forbidden. Deliberate harm beyond the scope of competitive combat will result in immediate disqualification. Victory is achieved through superior technique, strategy, and martial prowess. Do both competitors understand?" "Yes," Throxzul said. "Sure," I replied. The referee backed away to a safe distance. "Combatants, begin." Throxzul immediately launched into what I can only describe as a devastating opening sequence. All 4 blades moving in synchronized patterns, closing the distance between us faster than I expected. Strike combinations that would have overwhelmed anyone trying to match him blade for blade. It was genuinely impressive. It was also extremely predictable. See, here's what I'd noticed watching all those earlier matches. Everyone fought the same way. Beautiful technique, perfect form. Everything choreographed and rehearsed 1,000 times. Nobody improvised. Nobody broke pattern. Nobody ever did anything that wasn't specifically blade-related. Throxzul's first combination came at me like a green whirlwind of energy. Upper strike, mid-thrust, low sweep, reverse slash. Textbook perfect. Probably called something fancy like The four winds of devastation. I sidestepped left. His blades cut through empty air. His second combination came even faster. More aggressive, more complex. Whatever this technique was called, it probably had at least 8 words in the name. I ducked under it and stepped inside his guard. And then I punched him directly in his primary face. Not with my sword, not with some elaborate combat technique. Just a straight right cross, exactly like my dad taught me when I was 12 years old. The impact wasn't devastating or anything. I'm not a super soldier. But Thraxul clearly hadn't expected it because he staggered backward, mandibles clicking in confusion. The arena went dead silent. On the screens, I could see the commentators frozen mid-sentence, trying to process what just happened. Thraxul recovered fast, I'll give him that. He reset his stance, all 4 blades coming back up into guard position. But now there was something different in his posture. Uncertainty. This wasn't in any of the training scenarios. He attacked again, this time more cautiously, testing me, trying to figure out what I'd do next. I parried one of his blades with my sword, which surprised him because apparently he didn't expect plain steel to hold up against energy. Then, while he was processing that, I swept his legs. Just a basic leg sweep, the kind you learn in any self-defense class. Thraxul went down hard, all 4 arms flailing as he tried to catch himself. I stepped on 2 of his wrists, pinning his lower arms and their energy blades to the ground. My sword point came to rest about an inch from his throat. Total elapsed time from begin to pin, 11 seconds. The silence in the arena was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Yield? I asked. Thraxul's compound eyes stared up at me in what I'm pretty sure was complete shock. His mandibles worked soundlessly. Around us, 70,000 aliens sat frozen in disbelief. You struck me with your appendage, he finally managed. Yeah, that's called punching. Pretty standard human thing. But the blade combat, the techniques, are really pretty and super impressive, I said. But you guys spend so much time making fighting look beautiful that you forgot it's supposed to be effective. The referee floated closer, its many eyes blinking rapidly like it was trying to reboot. Does the champion yield? It asked uncertainly. Thraxul's blades deactivated. I yield. I stepped back, offering him a hand up. He stared at it for a moment before accepting, using one of his upper arms to pull himself to his feet. The arena exploded into chaos. Not cheering, not exactly, more like confused shouting, aliens arguing with each other. The commentators talking over each other, trying to explain what had just happened. Some species were booing, others were laughing. A few looked genuinely angry. On the big screens, they were replaying the match in slow motion. 11 seconds, 1 punch, 1 leg sweep, 1 very confused galaxy. The tournament director flew into the arena on some kind of anti-gravity platform, feathers ruffled to maximum agitation. I need to consult the rules, he sputtered. The use of non-blade strikes during blade combat. This has never. We need to review. The rules said combat until someone's disarmed or incapacitated, I pointed out. They didn't say I could only use my blade. You never specified blade-only strikes. You could see the exact moment he realized I was right. His feathers deflated slightly. Thraxul stood nearby, still looking shell-shocked. I trained for 15 years, he said quietly. 15 years perfecting my technique. And you defeated me with primitive brawling? Not primitive, I corrected. Practical. There's a difference. Is there? Velshara's voice came from the competitor's box, sharp and cold. You won through brutish ignorance, not skill. I won because you all confused performance with combat. I shot back. Every single match today took 30 minutes of dancing around with energy blades. Beautiful? Sure. Efficient? Not really. You've turned actual fighting into theater. Krathmore stood up in the box, his voice booming across the arena. The human disrespects our traditions. I respect your traditions fine, I called back. I just don't confuse tradition with effectiveness. Humanity spent thousands of years fighting with swords when it actually mattered. When losing meant dying, not losing points in a tournament. We learned real fast that looking good doesn't matter if you're dead. The crowd's noise intensified. Some aliens were nodding. Others looked offended. A few were taking notes. The tournament director consulted with several officials, their hushed conversation lasting several minutes while I stood there awkwardly, still holding my very ordinary steel sword. Finally, he turned back to the arena. After reviewing the rules, he announced reluctantly, the match is declared in favor of Captain Jake Reeves of Earth. While unorthodox, his tactics did not technically violate tournament regulations. The word technically was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. However, he continued, the Galactic Council will be reviewing combat regulations for future tournaments to ensure appropriate standards of technique are maintained. Translation: they were going to change the rules specifically because of me. I'd simultaneously won my match and gotten humanity unofficially banned from ever doing it again. Honestly, worth it. The next 3 hours were a bureaucratic nightmare. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss whether my win should count. Apparently, punching during a sword fight had never occurred to anyone as a possible strategy, which said more about them than it did about me. I sat in a waiting room eating more approximately popcorn while lawyers argued in 17 different languages about the philosophical definition of blade combat. Thraxzul found me there. Human, he said, all 4 arms crossed. I have spent the last hour meditating on our match. And, you were correct. I was not prepared for actual combat. Only for the tournament's version of combat. He paused. This is humbling. Hey, your technique is still incredible, I offered. You'd probably destroy me in a straight blade versus blade fight. I just didn't give you one. That, he said slowly, was perhaps the point. Eventually, the council returned with their verdict. My win would stand because they couldn't find any rule I'd actually broken. But starting next year, the tournament would have new regulations specifically prohibiting non-blade physical strikes and techniques inconsistent with the spirit of martial artistry. They were workshopping the exact wording, but the message was clear. Humanity had won once by fighting dirty, and they weren't going to let it happen again. The tournament director handed me my trophy with all the enthusiasm of someone passing a kidney stone. Congratulations, Captain Reeves. You are technically the victor of this preliminary round. Thanks, I said, taking the trophy. It was surprisingly heavy and looked like someone had melted down a chandelier. So do I advance to the next round, or? The council has decided that given the controversy surrounding your victory, it would be best if humanity withdrew from further competition this year, to allow time for rule clarification. So I'm kicked out. You are invited to voluntarily withdraw. That's just getting kicked out with extra words. He didn't disagree. News of the match spread across the galaxy faster than light speed, which I'm pretty sure violated physics, but whatever. Humanity's representative had defeated the 15-year reigning champion in 11 seconds, using techniques that could charitably be described as street fighting. The reactions were mixed. Some species thought it was hilarious. Others called it an insult to martial traditions. A few contacted Earth's diplomatic corps, asking if we offered combat training because apparently practical efficiency was suddenly interesting. My favorite response came from a military academy on some outer rim planet that changed their motto to "Find what works," and started teaching students to question their training assumptions. Thraxzul announced his retirement from competition. He said he needed time to reconceptualize his understanding of combat, and maybe learn some human fighting techniques. Last I heard, he was taking boxing lessons on Earth. Velshara refused to speak to me. Krathmore grudgingly admitted that power without adaptability was perhaps incomplete. As for me, I became simultaneously the most successful and most controversial human representative in galactic sports history. Earth's diplomatic corps couldn't decide whether to give me a medal or bury the whole incident in classified files. I ended up getting both. My last night on the station, I sat in my quarters polishing my plain steel sword and watching the news coverage. Commentators were still arguing about whether I'd demonstrated innovative thinking or just barbaric ignorance. A message came through from the Galactic Council, very formal, very polite. Basically said, "Thanks for participating. Please never come back." I wrote a response. "Maybe next time, workshop your rules with people who've actually had to fight for real." Well, not for real, but you know what I mean. I hit send before I could overthink it. The transport back to Earth left the next morning. I grabbed my trophy, packed my bag, and headed for the docking bay. At the departure gate, I ran into Thraxzul one last time. "Human Jake," he said, "I wanted to thank you. For beating you in 11 seconds? For reminding me why we fight in the first place. Not for beauty, not for tradition, but to win." He extended one of his 4 hands. "Perhaps humanity is not as primitive as we believed." I shook his hand. "And maybe the galaxy isn't as advanced as it thinks." He clicked his mandibles and what I'd learned was laughter. Perhaps we both have much to learn. The transport ride home gave me plenty of time to think. The galaxy had spent thousands of years refining combat into an art form, something beautiful and philosophical and meaningful. Humanity had spent thousands of years trying not to die, different approaches, different results. I got back to Earth, filed my report, and returned to my normal duties. My commanding officer asked if I'd learned anything from the experience. Yeah, I said. Sometimes the best strategy is the one nobody expects because everyone forgot it was an option. He thought about that for a moment. Is that wisdom or just dumb luck? Why not both? 3 months later, I heard the Galactic Combat Championships had added 47 new rules, mostly variations on no doing what the human did. They'd also received applications from 6 new species who'd never competed before, all citing interest in a more practical approach to combat sports. Somewhere in my apartment, that ridiculous melted chandelier trophy sat on a shelf next to my college fencing participation certificate. The galaxy thought it had perfected combat. Humanity just showed up and punched it in the face. And honestly, that felt pretty good.